Hello, everybody. Welcome to the American Center in Moscow. My name is Jonathan Eig. This is my second time speaking with this group, and first time was for my book on Martin Luther King last year, and now I'm back to talk about another book, the book that I wrote prior to the King book, and that's a biography of Muhammad Ali. And I'm going to share some pictures with you if I can. There we go. There's Ali in Moscow in 1978. He was, at that point in his career, he'd just lost the championship, the heavyweight championship, to Leon Spinks, and was debating whether to retire, to continue fighting. And he was on this diplomatic mission of sorts, asked by the American government to come over. And this was a time of great stress between the two countries, as most of you certainly know. And Ali met with Brezhnev on this visit, did some sparring with some local fighters. And after his meeting, I want to read from one of these quotes that he gave after his meeting with Brezhnev. He said, I gave him a hug and a kiss on both cheeks, and he returned it. All he talked about was peace and love for humanity. He told me he'd like me to do all I can to better relations between our two countries, and he made me an official ambassador for peace to the United States. So don't be surprised if you see me in the White House soon. Not clear if that meant he would be visiting the White House or if perhaps he was considering a run for the White House. But it's a fascinating thing to think about. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this book and about Ali's life. But I want you to I want to begin by thinking about this moment in 1978. This is just 10 years after Ali was considered an enemy of the American government. When he refused to fight in the Vietnam War, he had joined the Nation of Islam and said that his religious principles forbade him from fighting in a secular war, as he called it. He was banned from boxing. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He never served because he was allowed to remain free while he appealed his case. And the case was eventually overturned on a technicality by the Supreme Court. But this was a man who was seen as a thorn in the side of the American government, someone who maintained at that point in his life that Black people in America were never going to be satisfied, that they were never going to be integrated into American society. And he and the leaders of the Nation of Islam believed that the way forward was a separate state for Black people, and that they would be better off apart from Americans. So how, in a mere 10 years, did he become a diplomat? Someone who was meeting with heads of state, someone who just a couple of years later would go back and travel the world advocating for a boycott of the Moscow Olympics in 1980. It's a fascinating journey from rebel to American diplomat and patriot. And I'm going to walk you through that a little bit in our time here today. And I will leave time in probably the last 45 minutes or so, last 15 minutes or so for questions. So thanks for joining me on this little story of Muhammad Ali. For me, the idea of doing a Muhammad Ali book seemed almost too good to be true. I couldn't believe that no one had written his biography. There'd been many, many books about him, but no one had done an objective, unauthorized biography. And I began my journey. I should say that, Ali was one of my biggest heroes growing up as a kid in the 1970s. I had his picture on the ceiling of my bedroom. I just thought I didn't really know at that point what he really stood for. I knew he was an outsider. I knew he was challenging authority. I knew he was a thorn in the side of the American establishment. And to a kid in the 70s with long hair, if you can imagine that, that was a thrilling notion. And of course, he was also a great athlete, but I knew there was something more to it. And then some 50 years after his great success, after he became the heavyweight champion, I had the idea that he deserved a proper biography, one that treated him not just as an athlete, but as an important historical figure, someone as important as a U.S. president. And I began my journey, my attempt to tell his story by interviewing his wife. His wife, pictured here, Kalila. This is actually the first night that I met her. I approached her and said, I'd like to write biography of your husband. And Ali was married 4 times, but I thought Khalilah was the most important source that I could possibly have for this book, other than Ali himself, because Khalilah was married to Ali during those years where he really made his name and his legend, beginning with his embrace of the Nation of Islam, with his refusal to fight in Vietnam, defeating Sonny Liston to become heavyweight champion. Khalilah was there for all of it. And when I approached her this night and asked her if she would help me write Ali's biography, if she would cooperate with me, her initial response was, "Well, maybe, but you're going to have to pay me." And that's something I never like to hear. I ended up refusing to pay, but convincing her to cooperate anyway, because I made the case that Ali had really left the women out of his story over the years, that the women who contributed so much to his life and career, and Khalilah was a Muslim, member of the Nation of Islam, same as Ali. That's how they met and fell in love. She was working at a bakery on the south side of Chicago, one of the bakeries owned by the Nation of Islam. And she was just 16 when she met Ali and fell in love with him. Her story was so important that I knew she had to be a central figure in telling it. So I began my journey by interviewing as many people as I could who knew Ali. The other very important source for me was his brother, Muhammad Ali's brother, Rudy Clay. I'm going to talk a little bit about the family origins and how Cassius Clay and Rudy Clay grew up in Louisville. But here he changed his name to Rahman Ali when he joined the Nation of Islam along with his brother. And Rahman also wanted to be paid for an interview, not as much as Khalilah. And I, once again, one of the things that works to your advantage when you're working on a biography is these projects take, 4, 5, 6 years. You have time to attempt to earn their trust. And I was able to earn Rahman's trust in part by whenever I would visit Louisville, I would take him out to dinner, and I would say, I'll take you out to I'm not going to pay you, but I'll take you out to the, any restaurant you want. Price is no object. And this is where I always took him, this Chinese buffet. And when we pulled up for the first time to go to this Chinese buffet, the sign on the front said $9.99 all you can eat. And Rahman said, "Don't worry, it's $6.99 for seniors." And he was just a lovely, lovely man. And Muhammad Ali's best friend, practically his shadow all of his life. So I'd like to take you through a little bit of Ali's biography and a little bit of my experience in writing this book and how I came to better understand what Ali meant to this country and better understand how someone could grow up in this very ordinary working class lifestyle in Louisville, become one of our great rebels, and then in the span of just 10 years go from this rebellious figure to this beloved, seemingly safe figure who was admired by all Americans and who was, serving as a diplomat for the United States. It's just one of the most astonishing stories in recent American history. So Ali grew up in this house in Louisville, Kentucky. His father was a sign painter. His mother was a housekeeper. And Ali was a little different than most of our great heavyweight fighters. We think of most boxers coming from poverty. Ali came from a more blue-collar, middle-class background. The house was obviously in better shape when he lived in it. But he also grew up in the segregated South. And he grew up with a father who was deeply embittered by what the South and what racism had done to him. Muhammad Ali's father, now I mentioned earlier, he was born Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. His father, Cassius Clay Sr., was a sign painter who felt like he should have been respected as a great artist, but never got the chance because of the color of his skin, and grew up telling his children that you're never going to be anything. You're never going to be great because America won't let you. And that was kind of the attitude that Ali embraced. He felt like he couldn't accomplish anything, and his schooling didn't really help him. He was dyslexic, and even though he was very bright, he didn't perform well in school. It wasn't really until he discovered boxing that he began to think that maybe the world held something more for him. And the story of how Ali discovered boxing is a beautiful one, and it's a story that's been told over and over again. It happens to be true. Sometimes these great origin stories, when you inspect them, fall apart in your hands. But this is the gym where Ali discovered boxing. He was out one day with his brother riding their bike. They had one bike, they shared it, and Ali was pedaling and Rudy was on the handlebars, and it started to rain. They ducked inside of this building to wait out the thunderstorm, and there was a trade show going on in there, a home show with kitchen gadgets. And when they came back outside, the bicycle was gone. It had been stolen. And this was a brand new bicycle that they'd received for Christmas. It was a $50 red Schwinn. And Ali was so panicked about losing this bike that he went looking for a police officer. Somebody told him there was a police officer in the basement of this building. And when he went down there, he found an officer named Joe Martin, a white police officer, who was training kids to box. And for a moment, Ali forgot all about his bike. He saw this boxing gym, and he saw a white police officer working with black kids. Very unusual. His father always told him to avoid police because nothing good could come from a black kid having a run-in with a white police officer. But here was something different. And here in the boxing ring in the basement of this building, Ali saw black kids and white kids in the same ring punching each other. This was also mind-blowing because black kids, weren't supposed to punch white kids. And he was immediately entranced and asked the police officer for help with his bike. And the police officer, Ali said, if I find the guy who took my bike, I'm going to beat him up. And the coach, the police officer, Joe Martin, said, why don't you come back and really learn how to fight? And Ali did. He started going to the gym. And then he began seeing Joe Martin on television because some of his better fighters would fight on Friday nights. And those bouts were televised locally in Louisville. And now this kid who loved attention, Ali always loved attention, but couldn't get it in school, saw that maybe boxing would get him the kind of attention that he craved. The idea of being on television thrilled him to no end. So he began going to the gym every day and actually found a second gym where he could train after he finished training with Joe Martin. And he became completely absorbed in boxing and found that he was pretty good at it. He was not a great technician at an early age, but he was so fast that it was very hard to hit him. He was tall and skinny with long arms and long legs, and he was just incredibly speedy. But even from Joe Martin, he never really learned proper boxing technique. You're supposed to keep your hands up and protect your head. Ali would fight with his hands down here, moving and moving so nobody could hit him, throwing these jabs, escaping from trouble. And it served him pretty well. Well enough that he was able to fight some Golden Gloves tournaments and win. Well enough that he was able to go out for the Olympic team. And in 1960, win a gold medal for the U.S. And here we begin to see traces, early signs of the great personality and diplomat that Ali would become, this world figure, this beloved figure, because in the Rome Olympics in 1960, even before he'd won a single bout, everyone was talking about him. His personality was magnetic. He found ways to strike up conversations with people who didn't even speak English. He would walk around with a camera taking pictures, and before long, even the newspapers were calling him the mayor of the Olympic Village at age 18, still a high school student. In this picture, you see him coming back with his gold medal, with his brother by his side again. There's Rudy in the plaid jacket, and celebrating at Central High School with his fellow students, having won the gold medal. And now he's thrust onto the national stage and preparing for a career as a professional boxer. He's still just a light heavyweight, but he's going to move up in class as he gains a little weight. And he's failing at high school badly. He hasn't been attending classes. When he does attend, he doesn't do well. The principal of the school, though, says, there's no way we're going to let this kid escape without a diploma. We will just give him the diploma because someday he's going to be the most famous graduate of this school. And the principal was right. So Ali graduates from high school, begins his career as a professional fighter, and just keeps winning. He's, again, smaller and faster than most of his opponents, and people don't think he's going to get very far because his technique isn't good, but he just keeps winning, and he just keeps talking. And he recognizes very early on, his genius may have been in marketing as much as in as in boxing. He recognizes early on that the more he talks, the more popular he becomes, the more fights he gets, and the better chance he has of getting good fights with real contenders. And he also recognizes early on that there's a resistance to black fighters, black athletes speaking their mind and giving sass, and he intentionally behaves in a way that calls attention to himself and acts as if he's not a good sport, mocking his opponents, and the media seems to eat it up, and he feels like the more attention he gets for this behavior, the better chance he has of getting a shot at the heavyweight championship. Now, the problem is that the heavyweight champion is Sonny Liston, a man who seems to be unbeatable, a man who's much bigger and stronger than Ali, and who knocks out his opponents in a matter of seconds in most fights. But Ali's gunning for him, and Ali's taunting him, and Ali's calling him terrible names, using racial slurs to try to demean Liston, to try to get in his head. And finally, in 1964, Ali gets his shot at the heavyweight championship against Sonny Liston in Miami. And by now, he is beginning to explore the Nation of Islam. He's keeping it a secret from the media because the fight promoters and his managers are worried that if the word gets out that Muhammad Ali, that Cassius Clay is a part of the Nation of Islam, that he's connected to Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad, that this will be box office poison, that no one will want to come see him fight. And Ali is trying to keep this a secret, but the media is beginning to notice that he's seen very often with Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad. And it's worth mentioning here that the U.S. government believed that the Nation of Islam was a radical cult, and even perhaps a terrorist group, because they called for the overthrow of American government. They called for the extermination. They believed that a spaceship was going to destroy all white people on Earth, and that black people would inherit the land. And it sounds a little kooky. It was not in any way really related to Orthodox Islam, except that it used some of the same language. Later, Ali would evolve and discover true Islam. But for now, the Nation of Islam was his introduction. And I think it appealed to him because it had something in common with boxing. It was about self-reliance. It was about discipline. The Nation of Islam wanted to have their own businesses, their own food supply. They didn't want to be reliant on the white man for anything. And this really appealed to Ali. He said over and over again after his introduction to the Nation of Islam that that black people should be with black people and white people should be with white people. He didn't exactly, walk the walk, because he often lived in integrated neighborhoods and sent his kids to white schools, but this is what he preached, and it was very controversial. So even though Ali's making headlines and beginning to arouse suspicion about his political views, he still has to get past Sonny Liston. And the consensus in the media is that Ali's going to be destroyed, possibly killed. In fact, the media who were covering this fight in Miami, some of them go out and learn the quickest routes to the hospital so that they could get there in time to see Ali's condition when this fight is over. But Ali surprises everybody in this fight. Odds are 7-1 against him, and I'll stick with this slide for now. He beats Sonny Liston, and the next day he makes a statement to the press that's really one of the most important moments in Ali's life and one of the most important moments in American sports history. He tells reporters that, yes, he is a member of the Nation of Islam. Yes, he does believe in the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and calls him a prophet. And moreover, he says that this is America. Get used to it. It's going to be different here from now on. You may not like a black man speaking his mind, but you better get used to it. You may not like my religion, but you better get used to it. And this is really, in some ways, a declaration of independence. He's saying that you expect us, because we are athletes and because we are making money, that you expect us to be complicit. You expect us to be subservient. And many black athletes had played that role for a long time. When Joe Louis was the heavyweight champion in America, he was told not to be seen in the company of white women. He was told not to raise his arms over his head after defeating a white opponent. And Joe Louis played by those rules. But now Ali is saying, I'm not going to play by those rules anymore. It's a different world. And this becomes not just a Declaration of Independence for members of the Nation of Islam. It speaks to young black people everywhere, and certainly to young activists. Remember, the civil rights movement is now almost a decade old. The Montgomery bus boycott was started in 1955. We're now in 1964, and certain members of the black community are beginning to feel impatient. They're beginning to feel like Martin Luther King's nonviolent approach isn't making enough headway, and they're looking for more radical solutions. You're starting to see people like Stokely Carmichael, like the Black Panthers, making noise. And Ali's boldness, his declaration that he is the greatest at a time when many white Americans considered black Americans second class, this sends a message. Ali's raised fist becomes a symbol of power. The Black Panthers take that fist and make it their logo. And Ali becomes a real inspiration at a time of great danger in American society, great threat to the white establishment. And he's meeting openly with members of the Nation of Islam. Rudy gets into every picture, as you can see here again. And this really leads to the FBI and to the U.S. government beginning to see him as a threat. And soon after his Declaration of Independence, he's drafted to serve in Vietnam. And originally, when Ali first gets the news that he's been drafted, his response is, well, I don't want to fight. Like, let the government take my money. I'm paying a lot of taxes. They can buy tanks with that money. It's not exactly a pacifist or principled philosophical stand. He's just saying, I don't want to go. Let somebody else go. And then he begins to think about it. He begins to study it. He begins to talk to people about it. And his stance shifts. He starts saying, well, why is it that black Americans are serving disproportionately in this war? Why is it that they are even more disproportionately serving on the front lines? And why is it that they're dying in much greater numbers than their fellow white soldiers? Why should I go over there and fight for a racist government that treats me like a second-class citizen at home? Why should I go over there and kill my dark-skinned Vietnamese brothers when my white-skinned brothers here in America don't have any respect for me? Now he's taking a much more political stand. And from there, he adds, my religion forbids me to take part in this war, this immoral war. And for that, he is convicted of draft evasion. He's sentenced to 5 years, as you can see in this headline, a $10,000 fine. And while he appeals his case, he is banned from boxing. His license is stripped. His passport is taken away. So he cannot make a living. And in that time, he really begins to mature in a way and to recognize the power that he has outside the ring. You know, one of the people I interviewed for this book, Dick Gregory, pointed out to me that Ali was one of the few black leaders who could speak without a filter, who were not edited by the TV news or not edited by the New York Times reporters and editors, because he had a live microphone every time he fought. And even when he wasn't fighting, he began speaking out on college campuses. This was his only source of income for 3.5 years. And not only did he speak out on college campuses and really help to energize the anti-war movement, he also learned from those young college activists. He began to see himself as a much more political figure. He began to feel like he could speak out on issues beyond just religious ones. And we start to see him really maturing and coming into his own as an activist. And for 3.5 years, he's struggling to get back in the ring. Finally, the Supreme Court overturns his conviction. In 1971, he gets a chance to fight again, going back into the ring against Joe Frazier, attempting to win back his heavyweight championship that was taken away from him by the government. And I think this moment on the screen here is one of the key moments in Ali's life and career. in the in the very end, at the very end of the fight, and it's a close fight. Ali takes this powerhouse left hook to the chin. You can even see in this picture how swollen his chin is already. He's knocked down for the first time in his career. He gets up and finishes the fight and is declared the loser by decision. So Joe Frazier wins this fight. And I think this is a critical moment when Americans' view of Ali begins to change. Suddenly, this loudmouth braggart has been humbled. Suddenly, this man who had the courage to stand up to the United States government begins to be seen as a warrior. We respect his toughness. And also, the fact that he loses maybe generates a little bit of sympathy for him where there had been very little before, at least among white Americans. I mean, Richard Nixon was in the White House at this point and asked for a stream, asked for a live broadcast to be streamed into the White House so he could watch, because he wanted to see that N-word get what he had coming to him. He was, like a lot of white Americans, wanted to see Ali lose. But once he does lose, we start to see a shift. Ali suddenly seems like a more human figure, and people can't help but admire his toughness, standing up to Joe Frazier, standing up to the U.S. government. And we see Ali beginning to go to work, trying to earn back his heavyweight championship. And it's interesting, too, because we also see this transition. The Vietnam War will soon be over. The civil rights movement is kind of in tatters by the early 1970s. Martin Luther King has been assassinated. The marching, the protests in the street have ended. And Ali is trying to figure out what it means to be an activist now. And what he decides is that mostly he just wants to be a boxer. Also, Elijah Muhammad passes away, and Ali begins to feel a little bit lost, a little detached from the Nation of Islam. And of course, Malcolm X has been assassinated. So we start to see Ali turning into more of an athlete, and still a bold and outspoken one, but also sees himself as an entertainer. This is the point at which a young white kid like me, living in the suburbs of New York, might put Ali's poster on the wall, because yes, we know there's something controversial about him, but he's also yucking it up on the Johnny Carson show. And he becomes a very interesting, very complex figure, but also a part of the mainstream pop culture. And in the meantime, he's trying to earn back his heavyweight championship. Finally gets the chance to do that. George Foreman has defeated Joe Frazier. George Foreman is the new Sonny Liston. He's knocking opponents out with ease, knocking them out in a matter of seconds. And people think Ali has no chance against Foreman. Ali's older, he's slower, he's not avoiding punches like he used to. He's taking a lot of punishment. Some people think he's beginning to show signs of mental decline. His ring doctor, Ferdy Pacheco, one of the hundreds of people I interviewed for this book, told me that Ali was already showing signs of brain damage from too many fights at this point in his life. And people believe that Ali has no chance against Foreman. But this fight becomes kind of not just kind of, but a massive international spectacle. It's the fight to declare who is the baddest black man on earth. And the fight takes place in Africa, in Zaire of all places, in Kinshasa, under the order and under the rule and paid for by this dictator, Mobutu. And Ali's determined to prove that he is the black king of the world with this fight. And George Foreman, of course, feels the same way, that he's not going to lose. But Foreman is not the dynamic, outspoken figure, and Ali is getting in his head. One of my favorite stories from this book is, Ali loves to mock his opponents. And on the flight to Zaire, he says to his manager, "If I call George and Uncle Tom, are the people in Africa going to know what that means?" And his manager says, "Probably not." And Ali says, "Well, who do they really hate here in Zaire?" And his manager says, "Well, they hate the Belgians. The Belgians colonized this country and brutally killed thousands, hundreds of thousands of Africans, perhaps, to rape this country of its riches. They really hate the Belgians. So Ali gets off the plane in Kinshasa. In his customary way, he raises his hands above his head and he says, "I am the greatest. And George Foreman is a Belgian." And George Foreman, when he arrives the next day, can't understand why everybody already hates him. He hasn't done anything wrong. But Ali is having the time of his life over there, cutting it up, making friends. The fans, the Zairians fall in love with him. And somehow, miraculously, in this fight that is famous, called the Rumble in the Jungle, it's also famous for the rope-a-dope technique, where Ali just lets George Foreman hit him for the first 5 rounds until Foreman starts to get tired. And then Ali comes off the ropes, suddenly turns the fight around, knocks George Foreman out, and leaves the ring champion of the world again, champion of the entire world. And that's the moment that I wish the book ended. I wish his boxing career at least ended, because he goes on to fight another almost 10 years, and it doesn't go well. He loses his speed, he loses his power, he begins to lose fights. And as I mentioned, by the time he visits Moscow in 1978, he's lost to this young upstart Leon Spinks, who really had no right being in the ring with Ali. And we see Ali becoming even more of a celebrity. Here he is goofing around with Sonny and Cher. And then this is the moment that really changes our image of Ali forever. So now we're going to fast forward all the way to the 1980s. Ali is in his 50s now. He's suffering from Parkinson's syndrome, which is a result of the punches he's taken all of his life. And he has not been seen very much in public. He doesn't like the way he looks anymore. He can't control the shaking in his hands. He speaks very slowly. He sometimes falls asleep during interviews. And for the man who loved being in public more than anything, this is a man who, when he was bored, would just pick up the phone and call strangers, or would go stand on a street corner to see how long it would take for hundreds of people to mob him. This was a man who would go to the airport early just so he could make friends and shake hands. Ali just loved people. But Parkinson's forced him into isolation. He was embarrassed by the way he looked. And then at the Olympic Games in Atlanta in 1996, he's asked to light the torch. And no one knows who's lighting the torch until Ali steps out of the shadows, holding this torch, shaking in his hands. And he struggles to get the torch, to get the Olympic flame lit. For a while, it looks like the flame is going to burn him up because he's having so much trouble getting it lit. And when he succeeds, the crowd just explodes, starts chanting Ali, Ali. And I swear, if you watch it on YouTube, you'll have a hard time keeping from crying. It's such a beautiful moment. And this is really Ali's third act. This is the moment he says the next day in an interview on television that everyone's going to love me more now, because we all get old and we all die. And if they could see that me, the greatest, the prettiest, the fastest, the toughest, if they could see that this happens even to me, they're going to love me more than ever. And that's exactly what happened. Ali goes from being one of the most hated men in American history, in the American public, to one of the most beloved. And it's ironic and perhaps troubling in a way that we love him more when he can't speak. Stanley Crouch, brilliant essayist and social critic, said that there were 3 Alis. The first Ali was a grizzly bear. He was ferocious. He would tear your head off. This is the Ali who was seen as a threat to American culture, certainly to white establishment, to white supremacy. The second Ali in the 1970s was more of a circus bear. You go from the grizzly bear to the circus bear. He's still dangerous. He can still hurt you, but he's also there to entertain. There's a wink in his eye. And then the third Ali of this phase is a teddy bear. We just want to hug him and cuddle up, and we've forgotten how much he scared us. But I think it's important not to forget the dangerous Ali, because that's the one who matters. That's the one who shaped American culture. That's the one who had the courage to stand up and who served as a symbol of rebellion. And I think even today serves as a symbol of rebellion. When we see athletes like Colin Kaepernick fighting the system, when we see people like LeBron James standing up and saying that they're not just going to be a basketball player, they're not just going to shut up and dribble. They are heirs to the Ali throne in that way. So before I close to take questions, I just want to tell you about my meeting with Ali. It happened on this night in Louisville, and this was in 2015, shortly before he passed away. All throughout this book, I was trying to meet Ali, and I went to his house to meet with his wife, and he was too sick to come out of his room that day. I spent 3 hours there in the house. I could hear him watching TV in the room next door, and I did not get to meet him. I went down a couple times to Louisville when he was appearing at awards events, didn't get to meet him. I interviewed hundreds of his friends. I got to know all 3 of his wives very well. I got to know his brother Rahman. But of course, I wanted, and Ali hadn't done an interview at this point, by the way, in more than a decade. So I knew that I wasn't going to get a chance to talk to him, but I still felt like to spend 5 years of my life researching his life, I had to meet him. I had to shake his hand. So finally, in the fall of 2015, Lonnie called me and said, Muhammad and I are going to be in Louisville. Muhammad's getting an award from Sports Illustrated, and I think you should come. So I drove down to Louisville overnight, got there in the morning, nervous as can be, and trying to think, what am I going to ask this man if I get the chance to talk to him? Even if he can't necessarily answer, maybe he can answer. I have to try. I have to ask him something. And I had years to think about what I would say to him. And that morning, I went for a run. I'm a big runner. I went for a run along the route that Ali used to run when he was in high school, when he was dreaming of becoming a boxer. And in fact, I'll tell you a funny story. There's a myth that Ali used to run alongside the school bus, that instead of taking the bus to school, he would ride. He would run alongside the bus. And I interviewed one of his friends from high school, and he said, oh yeah, it's true. We would get on the bus, and Ali would be running alongside us and laughing and waving to us. And I said, so was this one of these big yellow school buses? Like, did you put the windows down and yell out to him? And he said, no, it was a city bus. And I had to think about it. And I called him back the next day. I said, wait a second, you said it was a city bus, right? Doesn't the city bus stop every block? And he said, oh yeah, it stopped every block. And in fact, we had to transfer on Chestnut Street to a different bus. And Ali would just stop when the bus stopped. And he would wait with us when it transferred. So I said, so he wasn't really racing the bus at all, was he? And his friend said, no. Ali was a clown. He just loved the attention. He wasn't really doing it for exercise as much as for attention. He just wanted to be seen. And I love that detail. It tells you so much about this kid and about this man. So by the time I find myself running along this route, thinking about meeting Ali that night and wondering what I'm going to ask him, it struck me as kind of preposterous. Who am I, a white guy running through black neighborhoods in Louisville, trying to imagine what it's like to be Muhammad Ali? I have no right to try to imagine what it was like to be Muhammad Ali. Do I even have a right to tell his story? What gives the biographer the right to tell anybody's story? So I made up my mind that I would just ask him what he wanted to say. So that night, Larry Holmes, the champion who defeated Ali, seating to the left, invited me to the VIP party where Ali was going to be present. And George Foreman, who I'd interviewed already, they kind of served as my bodyguards. They walked me through, got me up close to Ali. And I leaned in and put my hand on his arm. As you can see, he's wearing those glasses. I couldn't look him in the eye. And I said, Muhammad, my name's Jonathan, and I'm writing a biography. I'm writing your biography, and it's a great honor. I'm going to try to do justice and tell your story the way it deserves to be told. And I just want to know if you have anything you want to say. And I leaned in, I put my ear right next to his face, and he didn't speak at all. I went away devastated, just not even knowing whether he knew I was there or whether he understood what I said. And later, I spoke to his wife, and she said, yes, he heard me, and he's glad that I'm writing the book, and he wanted me to read it to him when I finished. And well, he passed away before I finished the book, so I never got the chance to read it to him. But I tried to write a book that would do him honor. I tried to write a book that was complex and dealt with all of his contradictions, tried to explore how someone could be both a rebel and seek popularity as he did, and how he had this enormous impact on the world. And I'll just close by saying that when I think about Ali, I think about somebody who really knew who he was and didn't care what the public thought of him, didn't care whether he was unpopular, because he knew what mattered to him. And it was in his heart to make people love him, so that even when he was at his most unpopular, he was somebody who would take the time with other people, would talk to his critics. And that's what's so extraordinary about him. I think Ali proved that you can be yourself, you can be a rebel, you can be beloved. And when you live your life with that kind of an integrity, then I think you earn the right, as Ali did, to call yourself the greatest of all time. So I'll close there. I think we still have some time for questions. I see one question in the chat. I don't know if Tessa's in charge of the chat, whoever it is, but feel free to type more questions into the chat. The question that I see on the screen here is, what initially inspired you to write about Ali? And, the initial inspiration was really just this conversation I had with another biographer who was thinking about doing a Babe Ruth book. And we were talking about whether there's room for another Babe Ruth book. And I said, there's always room for another Babe Ruth book, because, other than Muhammad Ali, who's more interesting or more important in the history of American sports? And as I said that, I thought, wow, maybe it's time for a big, fat presidential style biography of Ali. How is it possible that he hasn't had one yet? At that point, it had been 50 years since his Declaration of Independence, since he became a member of the Nation of Islam, since he protested the Vietnam War. So I thought that was enough time gone by to put it in historical perspective. But it was also a sort of a sweet spot, because you still had a lot of people alive who knew him. And I would be able to get my hands on FBI records. And I just thought that it was a story that had themes that were incredibly relevant to us today: race and religion, the role of sports in society. These are things we're still struggling with, and that Ali could be a guide. So that was really the inspiration. How long did it take me to write the book is another question here. It was about 4.5 years, and I don't do anything else. I don't teach. I don't write magazine articles. This is my full-time job. I try to pay some attention to my family, and I try to get out and exercise. And but book writing is a full-time job for me. I'm very lucky in that way. There aren't too many people who can say they make a living writing biographies full-time, and I'm blessed to be in that corner. So I'll usually spend about a year, sometimes a year and a half, doing nothing but research, interviewing people, looking for archival materials, and then I'll start writing. But I'll continue doing research as I'm writing, and I'll be researching all the way up to the very end. Sometimes I'm researching after the book is published. After the book was published, I found some new information about Ali and his family history. I was able to identify one of his great grandparents and discovered that he was an escaped slave who actually played a heroic role in the Civil War. And I was able to add that information to the paperback. On my Martin Luther King book, I'm still doing research on Ali's genealogy. So the book, even though it's on shelves, in a way, the research never ends. And for the Ali book, I did probably something like 250 interviews. So it's a lot of work. And you see, here I am in my office. I work out of the family laundry room, basically, and I don't have a team of assistants. It's just me filling up my file cabinets. I think the hardest part of writing this book was gaining the trust of some of the people closest to Ali. In particular, his 3 living wives. He was married 4 times. And I thought it was very important for this book to right some of the wrongs that had been done to these women. Their stories had never properly been told. Ali was not good to his first 3 wives. I wanted them to have their say. I wanted their side of the story to be told. But earning their trust was exceedingly difficult. I showed you the picture of Kalila earlier. I made the case to these women that it was important that their stories be heard. But even so, why trust me with it? How do they know that I'm not going to favor one of the other wives? There was a lot of concern that because I was speaking to Lonnie, his 4th wife, that she would have some control over this book, that she might decide what one got in and didn't get in. And I was very determined to prove to them that I was objective and that I was taking no sides. In general, I found that people in the boxing world were difficult to persuade to give interviews because they got ripped off all their lives. They were never paid what they deserved. And then I come along and I say I'm writing a book and they want to be paid for those interviews. And, I just think it's unethical for a writer to pay for interviews. So it took me a long time often to convince folks to cooperate. And that was one of the hurdles that I had to overcome. Which interview surprised me the most? Probably one of the toughest guys to get to talk to me was Don King. And if you know anything about boxing, Don King, the guy with the hair that stands up straight. Someone wrote that he looked like he was falling down an elevator shaft. His hair always stood up. He was the promoter who took over Ali's career and promoted most of the big fighters. And he's someone who ripped off all of his fighters and kind of joked about it. At one point, Ali said that his contract called for another $1 million that Don King had shorted him on. And Don King sent a notary with a suitcase full of $100,000 cash and asked Ali to sign a waiver saying that he wouldn't be responsible for the $1 million that he owed him in exchange for this $100,000 in cash. And Ali took the money. He took the cash and signed away the $1 million. And Don King, in many ways, was a terrible human being and ripped off these fighters. And I was determined to interview him. And he kept saying, no, won't talk to me. I tried to trap him, tried to corner him a couple of times. And finally, I went to a parade where he was marching in this parade. And I followed him out all day throughout the parade. And he kept saying, no. Finally, I got him to talk to me. And I knew that I had to that it was going to be hard to get him to say anything, to get him to speak honestly. And he's also one of these guys who's been telling the same stories over and over. And he has this rap, that he just falls into. He'll give you his spiel. No matter what the question, he'll just go into his spiel. So I was determined to find a question that would shock him a little bit and get him to talk. So finally, at the end of this long day, he sits down, and we're in a bar. It's loud. It's not ideal at all. And I stuck my tape recorder in his face. And I said, Don, I want to know why nobody ever killed you. You're ripping off these fighters. You're ripping off the mafia. You're ripping off the Nation of Islam. They killed Malcolm X. Why didn't they kill you? And he loved that question. He loved it. He just lit up and he laughed and he started telling me all the stories about ripping people off and how he, how he got away with it and how he went to Elijah Muhammad and made his case for why he should be trusted to run to run Ali's career. And that's one of my favorite stories. Let's see what else we got. What lessons can young people or athletes today learn from Ali's story? I think the biggest lesson is that if someone gives you a podium, if sports is your podium, or writing books is your podium, or winning the spelling bee is your podium, think about the power that you've got. And yes, you should be thrilled at your accomplishment, and being celebrated is wonderful, but it also gives you a responsibility to stand up for what you believe in. And I think Ali's story is really about a kid who never thought he'd have a chance to be heard, taking that chance and making the most of it. Who am I writing about next? I'm going in a very different direction on this one. Someone who is also, I'll be back to talk to you about this in a few years because my new subject also has a strong connection to Russian history and the same era that we're talking about, the 80s. I'm writing about George Soros, and it will be the first complete biography of Soros. He's cooperating with it. We're not in any kind of a business relationship. He has no editorial right over this book. He won't get to see it until it's finished. But he has been sitting for interviews and opening his files to me. And I view it as a story of a century of democracy. This 95-year-old man, this mysterious, much reviled figure who survived the Holocaust, spent tens of billions of dollars to support democracy all over the world and to try to foster open societies, becomes an enemy of the state again, even in his own, two of his home countries, in Hungary and in the United States. So that's my next subject. And when you think about Ali now, do you remember him more for the fights inside the ring or for his actions and impact outside of it? That's a great question. I still love going back and watching the old fights, but I think I love watching his old interviews even more. Every day, practically, somebody sends me a new interview. There's still new stuff showing up on Instagram and on YouTube all the time. And I'm constantly amazed at how brilliant he was and how kind and how warm and how funny he was. And I keep finding new interviews and I can't resist. I can't stop watching them. So I think I'd have to say he's more appealing to me outside the ring. Also, boxing is, makes me very uncomfortable. I hate seeing people get punched in the face. Even a beautiful fighter like Ali, it's sad to think about what these guys are doing to their brain cells. Will there ever be another athlete like Ali? No, absolutely not, because they make too much money now. I mean, Ali gave up millions by refusing to fight in Vietnam, but now these guys are giant corporations. And even someone like LeBron, who's had the courage to speak out, certainly after the George Floyd murder, you saw athletes taking a stand, but these guys have too much money on the line and they have too many people depending on them for their careers. They have deals with production studios. I don't think we're ever going to see an athlete take the kind of chances that Ali did. And I'm not sure it would even matter because, Ali was able to say something and have half of Americans hear it. Now our media is so fractured. It's very hard for anyone, even someone like Martin Luther King coming along today. Would he be able to reach the masses the way he reached them in his time? I doubt it. And if I could ask Ali one question today, what would it be? I would ask him what he thought about my book. How did I do? Maybe I don't want to hear the answer. He'd probably laugh at it. If there are no more questions, I will be happy to hang around for a few more seconds. And I want to let you know that you can watch my conversation with the American Center in Moscow on Martin Luther King. There'll be instructions when we finish here on how to watch that one. And if anybody has any good stories about George Soros in Moscow or anywhere else, feel free to contact me. My emails, if people have additional questions too, you can reach me on my website. There's a box for sending emails and I always respond. So with that, I will close. If I could add one more chapter to the book now, what would it be about? Oh, I see another question. You're going to keep me here one more minute. I think, it would be important to look at Ali's impact in the world today at a time when athletes aren't speaking out as much as they did. So that might be the next chapter. I think also, if I have to look back on my book, I think one area where I didn't do as much as I could have is on his diplomatic career. He spent a lot of, I deal with it in the book, but I think maybe I should have given it a little more space. His negotiations to free hostages in Iraq, in Lebanon. He tended to be seen, and I think maybe I treated him as just sort of a puppet that he was going over. He didn't really know what he was doing. He made things worse sometimes. When Carter sent him out to try to build support for the boycott of the Olympics, Ali mucked it up terribly because he just loved people so much that he would agree with whatever they had to say. So he would come back saying, "Oh, you're right. America's terrible. Like, don't listen to Carter." you go right ahead and you participate in those, Moscow Olympics if you want to. Ali just, he was very impressionable in that way, and his diplomatic career was kind of a mess. Maybe I'd pay a little bit more attention to that if I were writing another chapter to the book. All right, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to wrap it up and say goodbye or if someone else is, but I will say thanks to everybody for joining me, and I appreciate your time and your attention today.